The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Minister of Health. What reports, if any, has he received on the impact of homelessness, inequality, natural disasters on mental health of New Zealanders?
The Honourable Visitor Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I received a range of reports on the mental health of New Zealanders. There are a wide range of complex determinants that affect an individual's mental health and well-being. This government has made significant investments from strengthening the economy, warmer housing, lifting benefits, as well as increases to the health budget to a record $16.1 billion in 2016.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If he is aware of the impact of natural disasters on mental health of New Zealanders, as he claimed several weeks ago, why has he underfunded mental health services in Canterbury by $22.8 million, according to information released by the District Health Board dated the 24th of June 2016?
The Honourable Mr. Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, that member knows that the funding has increased in the Canterbury District Health Board region by $44 million in the last budget. That member also knows that, that we increased the funding for mental health services in March for the next 3 years as part of a package of initiatives to boost current mental health services in Canterbury.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Is he aware the additional $5.48 million per year he allocated to Canterbury DHB and requires to be spent on top of their mental health ring-fence expenditure leaves them with a $22.8 million shortfall, according to information released by the District Health Board dated the 24th of June 2016?
The Honourable Visitor Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Well, Mr Speaker, I again have to reiterate to that member that the government has increased funding to Canterbury District Health Board, has increased mental health funding. It is ring-fenced, but the Canterbury District Health Board, like every district health board in the country, needs to allocate that funding to the needs of those in their communities.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Has the Canterbury DHB informed him they're going to have to take funds from other health services such as personal health and the health of older people to make up for the underfunding in mental health, according to the information released by the DHB dated the 24th of June 2016?
The Honourable Visitor Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister again, I say to that member that the funding has increased in the Canterbury District Health Board region. There are an extra 27 FTE primary care and community-based mental health workers, as well as further funding for current programs such as telehealth in the area.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table an official information request dated the 24th of June 2016 from the Canterbury District Health Board, information within as outlined in my questions to the Minister.
Order. Leave is sought to table that particular OIA information. Is there any objection to it being tabled? There is none that can be
Supplementary question,
Supplementary
Mr Speaker.
question, the Honourable Annette King.
Has the increasing pressure and stress faced by many people living in the most deprived areas in New Zealand and the growing inequality in New Zealand, as outlined by Statistics New Zealand report yesterday, led to the 30,000 additional visits to emergency departments of hospitals around New Zealand by mental health users since 2011? If not, what is the reason?
Order. One of those supplementary questions, the Honourable Visitor Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr Speaker, there are a number of reasons why people present in emergency departments across the country, but what I can say about mental health services in this country is that there has been an increase in the demand for mental health services, which that member will acknowledge. But in terms of the access to mental health services, There are now over 22,000 adults, new mental health clients, of which 84% of them are seen within 3 weeks and 95% of them are seen within 8 weeks. So while there is an increased demand in mental health services, there has also been increased access for those that need that demand.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Is he alarmed at the recently released figures which show big rises in crisis mental health referrals, almost 300% over the last 5 years, a situation mental health professionals are now calling dangerous, and as Professor Max Abbott said, quote, clearly the cracks are showing?
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Mr. Speaker, that member knows that this government has increased mental health spending from $1.1 billion in 2008, when that member was in government, to over $1.4 billion in the latest budget. That's $300 million in increased spending to meet those services that are demanded by New Zealanders. That's right.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable
Thank you,
Annette
Mr.
King.
Speaker. In light of the huge increase in emergency department presentations, crisis call-outs and referrals in mental health, why won't the government stump up with funding to keep Lifeline going, a respected and long-time suicide helpline in New Zealand, and often the only service suicidal people contact?
The Honourable Pesata Sam Lotu-Iiga.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that member knows that after hours telephone health services were part of this government's manifesto in 2011. And I've advised that the successful bidder to that tender for those services, 7 months on, these services are performing above expectations, and the collective benefits of the Healthline integration to one provider are now being seen.
Is that question? Order. Question number 2. Order. Question